All rise.
All right, please be seated. Is defense ready to call its next witness?
We are, Your Honor. The defense calls Richard Freimark.
Okay.
It's like exceptionally long. It is. Well, because it's. Oh, it does? I didn't know that, because these don't do that.
Mark, yeah, if you can just come up here into the witness box. We'll have you step into it as close to the microphone as possible, but stay standing for just a moment while my clerk gives you a note.
Okay. Please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, then you may be seated and you may remove your mask. And then because we are being recorded, I'll ask you to please state and spell your first and last name.
It's Richard Freimark, R-I-C-H-A-R-D, and the last name is Freimark, F-R-E-I-M-A-R-K.
All right, and Mr. Freimark, there is water there if you want any.
Thank you.
Sure, but whenever you're ready.
Everybody's always afraid to drink the water, but you really can if you want to.
Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Freimark. Do you know the woman sitting next to me?
I do.
And how do you know her?
She's one of the first well, whatever the grammatically is correct. When we moved here in 1995, we moved here on September 15th, and the following Friday they had a new members Shabbat dinner at the temple, and the rabbi introduced me to her as the caterer at the temple.
Okay.
So I've known her since 1995.
After that, back in those days, were you selling bagels?
I had a bagel company.
Okay.
I had a Bagel Max Bagels, moved here from New York and made bagels for a year, and later sold that to Marcy Baking and continued selling bagels and challah on Fridays to Nancy and the temple, I think through probably 98 or 99.
Okay. During that time frame, do you know what Ms. Brophy was doing for a living?
She was a caterer.
And is that why she bought your bagels?
No, they were good.
They were good. I know that two things could be true. Have the two of you kept in touch over the years?
Business-wise, we've kept in touch, yes.
Okay. And how are you employed now?
I'm self-employed. I'm the president of Meridian Trust Real Estate Services and Fiat Lux Modus Opportunity Zone Fund here in Portland, Oregon.
You're a commercial realtor, is that right?
Commercial and residential realtor.
Okay. And are you familiar just generally with the necessary steps to subdivide a real estate lot?
I am not an expert in that, but I know the steps in which you have to go through and the professionals you have to bring in terms of engineers and who you need to talk to at the city to make sure that it's in compliance with local rules and regulations.
Okay, and just, you don't have to be real detailed, but just what are the general steps?
The general steps is to start with hiring a company like SK Engineering and make sure that you have enough land to either maintain the structure that's on it according to the zoning and have enough land and access to the utilities that would be required for the redevelopment of that other parcel. And other than that, it's more time consuming than difficult.
Okay. But not every property can be subdivided?
Most properties cannot be subdivided. Residential properties.
You mentioned that you met Nancy Brophy soon after you moved to Portland. When did you meet Dan Brophy?
I don't know exactly, but it was probably, I heard his name fairly soon after that, but I don't think I met him until my son's bar mitzvah, probably when he was 13. They catered the bar mitzvah dinner at our house.
Both Nancy and Dan?
Nancy and Dan.
Okay. And have you kept in touch with Ms. Brophy over the years?
I have from time to time, just over the phone. We've spoken about what she's doing, how things are going, and she changed her career along the line. I don't remember what she changed it to, but she changed it.
Would it be fair to say you guys are in contact maybe a couple of times a year?
3 or 4 times a year, we probably called each other.
Back in 2016 or 2017, did Dan and Nancy Brophy reach out to you seeking some advice?
Initially, Nancy reached out to me, and then she and Dan were on the phone with me talking about the property on 108th. I also
Talking
had,
about the property on 108th, you talking about the Brophy home?
I never saw it. I believe it was their home.
Okay. I don't want to ask you what they said. I just want to ask you, what was your general sense of what they wanted to know from you?
What they wanted to know was, could the property be subdivided? And I brought another gentleman in our office into the conversation who lived near there, and he thought it could be, but it would require an engineer to look at the property. And I also mentioned that when I looked up the report, there was a mortgage on the property. So even if they subdivided it and sold it, it wouldn't be a cash positive situation for the Brophies, because there's a lien on the property, and any proceeds from that sale would simply reduce the lien, the mortgage on the property, unless the land sold for more than the value of the mortgage.
Okay.
And we didn't get into the discussions beyond that. Because it's a long process, if Nancy wanted to do it, I gave her the name of the engineering company. I don't know what happened after that.
Okay, so you just kind of pointed to her.
I
towards
pointed
some
at
other
her,
professionals?
and Cronin in my office, who's one of the a local family in the building business, the Hoffmans. He thought he might be interested in building a home on the excess property for himself. And I spoke to him about that later, and he wasn't interested in pursuing it.
Okay. Do you recall about when that conversation was?
Which one?
The conversation, were there several conversations about subdividing the property?
I had a conversation with Nancy at a 20,000 foot level, and then Nancy and Dan were on the phone when we went through a copy of this report with First American Title.
Okay, is there, you have there what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 260.1, I have terrible handwriting.
Either
260.
266 or 260.
Let's call it 260 and bad handwriting, how about that?
It's better than mine.
Okay. At the time, what's the date on that? There's an email there. What's the date? on
June
that?
2nd, 17.
Okay. And the address there with Richard F. at Meridian, would that be you?
That's me.
And you are writing to whom?
To Nancy
Okay. And
at her Gmail account.
does it show whether there's an attachment to this email?
Yes, there's a PDF attached.
And what does it say that is?
It says 3380 Southwest 108th Avenue combined report 51459.pdf.
Okay, now I want to show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 260 and ask if you recognize that.
This is what was attached, yes.
Yeah. And what is that?
First American provides a service to us where if somebody owns a property, if somebody wants to buy a property, if we give them an address or an APN number, they can do what we call a trio, which shows any liens that might be on the property, who the owner is. If it's an LLC, they may be able to go down within the LLC and see who actually are the officers within the LLC and how the property is held.
Okay, and is First American, is that like a title company?
First American is one of the largest title companies in the United States, yes.
All right. And so is this document, this combined report, something that you emailed to Ms. Brophy after talking with her?
Yes. I probably would have mailed it to both of them, but I didn't have Daniel's email address.
We hear he's not a big email guy, is that? Yeah.
Never emailed him anything.
All right, so I want you to look at page 3 of that title report.
Okay.
And does this report generally show all the different owners of the property over time?
It's called a chain of ownership. So if you actually were to close on the property, it would show even more of the chain going back to when they stole it from the Native Americans. And so this starts with the sale in 1993 to when Nancy and Daniel purchased it in June 15th of 1999 for $244,900.
So if you see here on this transfer history that the buyers are Daniel and Nancy Brophy, does that indicate to you that both of them would be on the title to the property?
Yes, this would have them both on title, correct.
Okay. And what was the date of this again?
That was June
2017?
15th of 1999.
Okay. The time of this email, though, is June of 2017.
June 2nd, 2017 at 12:59 p.m.
When you looked at this title report in 2017, were you able to determine whether Ms. Nancy Brophy was still on the deed?
There was some question to that because on page 3, when they purchased the property, originally Nancy and Daniel were on the property, but then if you continue the chain of ownership, and it's not uncommon, moving forward in time, you'll see that there was a deed transfer from on the fourth month, January, February, March, April 29th of 2002. It transferred from Brophy, Daniel, and Nancy to just Daniel.
And based on your experience, is that consistent with maybe a second mortgage or a refinance of a home? Do you know?
It's consistent with refinancing, and it does show that there was the original mortgage was for $232,000 in closed the day before that.
Okay.
And there was actually 2 mortgages that closed on that day. There was one for $40,000 in Daniel's name and one for $232,000. And it may have been that Daniel had the financial ability to service the mortgage and Nancy didn't.
Okay.
And they may have taken her off at that point, but I was not involved in that transaction.
Okay.
And you can see also that First American Title was the title company that represented the transaction at that time.
All right. Just generally, what would your advice be to a spouse who found out that his or her spouse now held the property as a sole deed holder?
My advice would be, would be to make sure that you had some interest in the property if you had equity in the property. So your name may not be on the mortgage, but make sure it's on the deed. And if it's not on a deed, get it on the mortgage. Or the best is to have it on both.
One or the other.
One or the other or
preferably
both.
The fact that the property's held, in this case, we'll just call it John Doe, quote, married man, does that protect the other spouse?
It does in terms of how the property's held. It doesn't show that it's held as tenant in common. And since they're married, the asset would automatically go to the other partner. However, there would be a lien on the property that would go to the other spouse in the amount of the remaining principal on the mortgage.
Okay. Do you recall giving Ms. Brophy some advice in 2017 after you saw this?
After I saw this, in 2017, I did not.
Okay. Let me.
There were no flags at all.
In 2018, did you learn that Dan Brophy had died?
I did. I heard it. I don't remember exactly the date, but I do remember.
And did you contact Ms. Brophy?
I did. Nancy, my wife Nancy, and I both called Nancy Brophy to express our condolences and to see how things were going, and if there was anything we could do as friends to support her.
Had you just had another friend whose spouse had died, perhaps?
We did. Claire Coleman Evans, husband had just died, brain cancer.
Before we talk about your conversation with Ms. Brophy in particular, I want to ask you this. Do you have an understanding of just basic real estate lending?
I have a basic, yeah, I've done hundreds of millions of dollars of mortgages, so I know the concept. I've never written a single mortgage.
Fair enough. Based on your experience, how might a mortgage lender react to the death of a sole note holder on a mortgage?
It depends on the language within the mortgage. Mortgages are very often due or payable upon sale or upon death of the person who uh, the mortgage is guaranteed by. And therefore, I did ask Nancy at that time just to make sure she was on the mortgage or notify the bank of the situation to help make sure that they didn't call the mortgage on her.
So would you, if you were a person in Nancy Brophy's position, would you be concerned that the bank might call the mortgage when they found out about the spouse's death?
I'd be concerned, but Nancy had also indicated that she had $350,000 worth of life insurance. So that should have been more that pay off the mortgage. So it wasn't a major concern.
Okay. Did you suggest to her at that time that she get her name onto the
I did
note?
suggest that she get it onto the note if possible, and she could actually use the life insurance as a lien.
Okay. Is there anything else I need? I think I'm done with you, but he might not be.
You done with me?
Yeah.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. Just a couple of questions for you. You talked a little bit about this, but can you explain a little bit more about what it means to subdivide a residential property and what all goes into that?
First of all, if we talk only about the city of Portland, which is what is important here, or actually this isn't important. I think this was Washington County. In the Metro Portland area, we have some of the most stringent zoning in the United States. Now, the state of Oregon has eased that up somewhat because of the housing crisis, but you have R3, R5, and other indications of how many square feet of property you have to have for a single family home and how large of a home can be within those square feet. And based on the size of the parcel and the topography of the parcel, I was led to believe that this property should be able to be divided. And as a realtor, it's outside of my I'm simply licensed to do real estate. They have to get a licensed person in civil engineering to go in, look at the meets and bounds, and make sure that after it's subdivided, both parcels meet the zoning code for coverage. And I never got into that conversation, but that's what has to be done. And if you get larger parcels, the state has a little quirk that says if you have a 700-acre farm and you subdivide it, it can't be subdivided again. So a lot of rural properties, people think they can go in and subdivide them and put a housing tract, but if they've already been subdivided, there are limitations to how many times it can be re-subdivided.
Okay. In this particular circumstance, was your understanding that it was going to be divided, or was the question about division into 2 parcels or 3 parcels? Do you recall?
In the conversation we had, we were talking about 2, and I probably spoke more about this than others. I don't get involved with subdividing parcels very often, but on this one, because it was Nancy and Cronin Hoffman who was in my office, and his family for years has built homes, and the other side of his family is the large Hoffman Construction Company who builds buildings like the one we're in now. He and his wife at that time were thinking of maybe, he thought he and his wife might want to build in that area, which is close to where they were living.
Okay. It sounds like it can be a fairly expensive endeavor.
It's not expensive in terms of a home. It can be expensive actually to the person who's selling the property because they'll go through a whole process. They end up with a neighbor they may not like, and they may devalue the property based on what's built. And the land is the smallest portion of the value of the property. And so when they sell the land, they don't really get a cash benefit out of it. They do get a lower mortgage because the bank would simply apply the same as if it was eminent domain and you get cash and there's a mortgage, you don't get to keep the cash. It goes to the bank. The lien holder takes it.
And it sounds like too that it relies pretty heavily on permits and approval and things that could sort of go sideways on you.
It it's actually fairly black and white. It doesn't really go sideways. It's limited more by time and prepaying for the engineer. In this case, and we only had the brief discussion, the buyer was willing, in our brief discussion, was willing to pay for the engineering to see if it could be done.
And so it sounds like in addition to Mr. Hoffman, did you also provide other names? I think you mentioned an engineering company.
AKS Engineering.
Okay, and you gave that information.
I gave Nick White's name at AKS, it's the only engineering company I deal with. I've just had that. They do a lot of engineer work for the counties, the 3 counties in the area. And they also do a lot with water, and most of the projects, larger projects, had to do with water.
Okay. So it sounds like you gave them the Brophies, some specific names and people to follow up with, and this is kind of the way to go. I can't tell you any more about it.
Correct. And if they don't like that company, go get somebody else.
And to your knowledge, did they ever follow back up with you or talk to you more about?
Not that I recall.
And that, I think you explained this just a minute ago on direct, but did you have that conversation with the Brophies about it not being a particularly cash positive situation, particularly when you were looking at the lien of the mortgage? Is that what you were saying that kind of prompted that conversation?
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, and so, but Mr. Hoffman and Mr. White, are those the only two referrals that you made that you recall?
We had an architect. It was the first time I met Barry Smith, who's a local architect. And actually, I talked to Barry about it the other day, and he doesn't remember it. But Barry gets so many phone calls and projects that don't happen. It's not uncommon.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
That's it.
All right, redirect
Yeah, I
examination.
lied. I have more. If you will look at the second to last page of Exhibit 260,
Second to last page.
second to last page.
Can I lick my fingers with COVID? Okay. Okay.
Okay. I want you to see what I'm seeing, just so that we end up looking at the same part of this. See what I'm looking at?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If we assume that this property right here is the Brophy property, and I'm not fibbing to you, the property right next to it, which looks to be the same size as the Brophy property, does that appear to have been subdivided into 3 lots?
I don't know if it was subdivided or it was originally.
Hold on for just 1 second. There's sort of a chiming noise. I'm not sure what it is, but if someone has a phone, they do need to turn it all the way off.
That would be me.
Oh, all right.
Somebody came to my house.
You got an Amazon
All
delivery?
right.
No, with COVID, my office is out of my house instead of Second and Morrison.
But this lot that's next to the Brophy property,
It could have originally been divided that way. I don't know if it was subdivided.
but if you go down the lots, all of the lots along the street look to be the same size.
That's
the same
correct.
width, the same length, except for this one little property that's now divided into 3 pieces.
Correct.
Okay. I have no further questions. Now I really am done. Thank you very much.
All right, and may the witness be excused.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Mr. Freimark, you can step down, and as you leave, you can turn your phone back on. All right, the defense next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense calls Daniel Rubinson.
Okay. All right. I'll have you swear Dr. Rubinson in.
Please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. You can remove your mask and you may be seated. And then because we are being recorded, could you please state and spell your first and last name?
Sure. Daniel Rubinson, Daniel, Rubenson.
All right. Ready defense.
Dr. Rubinson, would you like some water?
I'm good right now, but
Okay,
maybe I'll have
great.
myself in a few.
We're gonna remove the old cup that was there, and
I thought we were sharing.
definitely not.
Not that far out of the woods yet. So, Dr. Rubinson, what is your professional status currently?
I'm an emeritus professor of economics at
To help you in whatever way I can. Uh-oh. Oh my
I
gosh.
thought this was, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So let me ask you again, what's your professional status currently?
I'm an emeritus professor of economics at Southern Oregon University in Ashland.
All right. So tell us a little bit about your background. I take it you've got a doctorate.
I do.
All right. Well, tell us, what was your undergraduate degree?
Sure. My undergrad is a Bachelor of Economics or Bachelor of Arts in Economics with honors from Stanford University. My PhD is from Carnegie Mellon University. I've worked as an economist at the Congressional Budget Office in Washington, D.C., but most of my career has been as a university professor.
All right. And did you teach outside of Oregon, or is that what brought you here?
I came here for the teaching job at SOU. Before that, I was a professor at the University of Hawaii in Hilo.
So tell us a little bit about, just in general terms, what does the field of economics encompass?
Oh gosh, how much time do we have?
That's why I said in very general terms.
Economics is a social science. It's about understanding human behavior.
Okay. And how does it, you were sitting here this morning and yesterday as you heard the forensic accountant Tiffany Couch testify.
Yes, I was.
How does economics differ from forensic accounting?
Okay. In a situation like this, Ms. Couch was sort of a ground level look. She was looking at all the accounts, all the financial accounts, and tracing where the dollars come in and go out. My job as a forensic economist is to be sort of at 30,000 feet. And so I'm looking at a bigger picture of evaluating the loss to the estate of Daniel Brophy.
All right. Now, is there a field of forensic economics just the way there is with accounting, forensic accounting?
Yes, there is. There are a lot of subfields within economics. There are people who specialize in international economics, the economics of healthcare, a range of other things. My own specializations are mostly in macroeconomics, which is understanding movements in the overall economy, and government finance, monetary economics. For the last 30 years or so, I've been working in the field of forensic economics, which is economics applied to legal cases, not so much criminal cases like this one, but mostly injury cases.
So you've testified in court before.
I have, yes.
Do you have an estimate of how many times?
Probably an average of 3 times a year over 30 years, so whatever that works out to be.
Even I can do that math.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned that most of that's in civil cases. Is it fair to say that typically when you provide your services in civil cases, that there are often cases where somebody has been hurt or injured, or an estate, a family is suing over the death of somebody?
Yes, that's where I'm typically called in. If someone is injured, maybe they can't work, and so as an economist, I'll be brought in to make an evaluation of what the loss of earning capacity is in that case. If it's a death case, then I'm making an evaluation of the loss to the estate or the loss of support to surviving family members, things like that.
So is that project or that assignment, is that called forming an analysis of economic loss?
Yes, that's the term.
Okay. And is that what we asked you to do in this case?
It is.
Have you ever done that before in a criminal case?
No.
Um, does the way you approach that analysis differ if it's a civil case or a criminal case?
Um, no, it's the same thing. I have zero experience with criminal law, but I was asked to do the same type of analysis that I would do if it were a civil case, as if Mr. Brophy had died in a auto accident or something like that, to look at the economic loss in that situation.
And in your field, and I'm asking specifically about your practice, your personal approach, does it matter which side in the litigation hires you?
Of course not. No, there's a way to do this analysis, and economists who do this work are all playing from the same playbook, doing it the same way. It doesn't make any difference.
All right, so let's talk about what goes into this analysis of economic loss. How many different spheres are you looking at to come up with your final analysis?
In this case, every case is a little bit different in terms of the kinds of economic losses. In this case, there were two areas of economic loss. One is the loss of pecuniary support, an ugly term for basically the loss of financial support that Mr. Brophy would have been contributing to the household. And the second is the loss of household services. That is the things that a person in a household contributes: cooking, shopping, house cleaning, home maintenance, things like that, chores in the house.
So this may be too much of a lay assessment or a reinterpretation of what you just said, but it sounds like the first one has to do with the reduction in income to the household.
It is based on the reduction in income, yes.
And the second is that the loss of services means that it's more expensive for the people left in the household, either in terms of time or services that they have to pay somebody else to do.
Exactly. And so when there's a loss of services, if a person is incapacitated or deceased, then other members of the household have to basically pick up the slack. And so what that person was doing in terms of shopping or home maintenance, cooking, laundry, whatever, someone else in the household has to do that, or maybe friends and family members help out, or maybe they hire assistants to do those things. But no matter how those things are provided, it's a cost to somebody, and so it's considered an economic loss.
Now, when you're performing this analysis, are you focused solely on the dollars and cents aspect of this, the economic part?
Yes, that's all economists are allowed to look at.
Okay. So if we had said to you, Dan Brophy was a wonderful man and a wonderful husband, he was an exceptional human being, and we want you to factor that in. He was just extraordinary. What would you say to us?
There's not really a way for me to put that into the analysis. That's something other than economic loss. That's human loss.
Okay, so you're not trying to touch those intangibles of the human loss. You're really just looking at the financial consequence.
That's correct, yes.
So the loss of income to the household part of it, the direct financial support, how do you go about assessing that?
Um, the concept is, and this is under Oregon law as it applies to civil cases, is to look at basically what the person would have earned and then make a subtraction for their own personal consumption spending. So the spending that would have gone to that person's own groceries and clothing and things like that. And so we're looking at not that piece, but what's left, which is the financial contribution to the household.
And it sounds like that analysis is somewhat specific to the person who has passed away, or the.
It is absolutely specific, yes. It's based on, of course, the person's income. It's based on their age and what we call work-life expectancy, how many years they would have been expected to continue working. And then I have to also make an allowance for inflation as earnings go up over time, and make an adjustment for what's called discounting to present value, which we can get into separately, and then the reduction for the person's own personal consumption spending to see what's left in terms of financial support to the household.
Okay, well, let's break that down a little bit. So with respect to his income, did you have access when you were doing your analysis to some of the Brophy's recent tax returns?
I did. I had recent tax returns and also W-2 statements for a number of years.
And what figure did you decide to use based on the documents that you reviewed? What figure did you decide to use for his
Sure.
income?
Let me find the table here.
We can display a tax return if you'd like to look at one of them.
No need.
Okay.
So the most recent figure I had for his earnings was from the 2017 tax return, and that showed income, Social Security wages of $66,165 for that year. And so I used that as a baseline for projecting the future.
Okay, and that was the most recent tax return prepared before his death?
That's correct, yeah, for a full year.
Okay. Did you, when you were reviewing that tax return, see that there was a Schedule C that identified a business that he was running in addition to his salaried employment?
I did. I think it was called Odonada, a separate business he had. I did not include his earnings from
Well, let's
that.
get to that in just a minute.
Okay.
But I do want to put a pin in that.
Sure.
So you made some mention of W-2 earnings, and I've used the term salaried, but I shouldn't presume that he was actually getting salary. But did you see in their W-2 earnings that reflected that he was working for the Oregon Culinary Institute?
Yes, yes. I had earnings from the Oregon Culinary Institute and also from Avamere
Okay,
for that year.
the retirement center.
The retirement center, yeah, for that year.
So what you were considering was the income that was coming from the Oregon Culinary Institute and from Avamere.
That's correct, yes.
And we'll come back to Odonada in a minute, but you mentioned you were not looking at that income.
That's correct.
Okay. So $66,000 a year is your starting point,
Yes.
right? And then how do you determine what to multiply that against? Like how many years do you assume he would be working?
In this case, the information that was provided to me was that he planned to work until age 70 so he could maximize his Social Security benefit. And so I built my analysis under that assumption. If I use the standard work-life expectancy tables, these are government data based on how long people of a given age actually work. That would have had him working up to age 69 or age 70 based on his age when he passed away.
Okay. So you said you've got 66,000 times, what would that be, 6 years?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say he's going to work at least 5 more years, 6 years. What do you do once you multiply that figure? It sounds like there are a couple of adjustments then you make as an economist.
Yes. So one is I have to make an allowance for inflation because wages, earnings tend to go up a little bit over time. And so I'm building in an allowance for the fact that his earnings probably would have gone up modestly over time. The inflation adjustment I use is based on the average growth in wages in the U.S. economy over the last 20 years. And then, so I'm building in a little bit of an increase each year, and then I have to do this thing called reducing to present value. And the idea there is that dollars or incomes received in the future are worth a little bit less than dollars received today. So, for example, if I was looking at, say, compensating someone $100 a year over 5 years, you might think, well, $100 a year, 5 years, we could just give the person $500 today and that would be fine. But that would actually be too much, because if a person received $500 today, they could take the $100 out for this year, put the rest in the bank or someplace where it would earn a little interest. The next year they take out another $100. The rest of it is still in the bank earning a little bit of interest. And so after 5 years of taking out $100 each year, there would be money left over. And so in order to avoid creating that kind of a windfall situation, I have to reduce those future dollar amounts basically to cover the interest that could be earned over those years. And that's what economists call reducing or discounting to present value. It's just a mathematical formula.
Okay, so there's an increase that has to do with predicting inflation or just normal wage
Yes.
increases, and then there's a decrease to bring it down to the current value of those dollars.
That's correct, yes.
And I think you mentioned that there's one other decrease that you applied.
Yeah, and so the larger one is the loss to his estate or survivors is not the total amount he would have earned, it's what would be left over after the spending that would be specific to him, money that he would spend on groceries or clothing or something like that, because that would not be a loss to his survivors. And so there are formulas based on the different kinds of things that households spend on over time. It varies with the size of the household and with the total income of the household, and there's a formula that we apply for that. And so in this case, the reduction for his personal consumption spending is about 20%.
Okay, and is that typically the reduction that's applied?
It really varies depending on the size of the household and the total income in the household. Those are the main determinants there.
Okay, so were there figures or outside data that you could look to decide that 20% was the appropriate reduction in this case?
Yes, there are standard formulas, standard tables based on the different things that households spend money on and how those vary for different households. There are government data and formulas that forensic economists use to make that calculation.
Is there much variance in the data that forensic economists turn to in this situation? I mean, are there like 3 different resources and you can cherry pick which one you want to use, or is there one standard?
There really is kind of one standard one. There's the article by this guy for work-life expectancy. There's the article by this guy for personal consumption. They're sort of standard sources that all the forensic economists use.
Okay. And you'd mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter which side you're on. So you think if we got a second forensic economist, he would give us a number that's pretty close to yours?
He or she, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. So let me go back to Odonada now. I'm not going to try to get you to talk while you're pouring.
But I can listen.
So, you know from reviewing the Brophy tax return in 2017 and some other years that there's a Schedule C for Nancy Brophy and there's a Schedule C for Dan Brophy on those returns.
Yes.
Okay. And you're consistently seeing that Schedule C for Dan Brophy for Odonada Foods?
Yes, I think I saw it in all the years I looked at.
Okay. In those years, and of course we're most concerned about 2017 because that's the one that's key to your determination, but in those years, did Odonada Foods actually make a profit?
No, it didn't make a profit in each year. There was revenue coming in, but then there were significant costs, largely for yard maintenance and other kinds of labor, and so it wasn't earning a profit.
Were you able to also review the Schedule Cs for Mrs. Brophy, for Nancy Brophy's income?
I did.
And was that business that was being reported on their joint, married filing jointly tax return, was that business making a profit?
It was in the last few years, actually, a significantly increasing profit toward the end.
Does that have any impact on your analysis when you're looking at economic loss flowing from his death?
It only has an impact because that personal consumption number I mentioned before, that 20%, is based on the total household income. And so the income that Nancy Brophy was bringing in showed up in that total.
So if Odonada Foods is showing up on the tax return, why is it that in this instance you decided it wouldn't be appropriate to use that as part of your calculation?
Well, in part because there wasn't actually a positive profit there. My understanding is that after Mr. Brophy retired, he planned to spend more time on that, and maybe it would have become profitable then, but I don't know that, and so it would have been somewhat speculative for me to assume that he would have generated significant income from that additional activity. And so, to be on the conservative side, I just didn't include it in the analysis at all.
All right, so even if we could point to his reputation within the culinary community here and his skill as a gardener and his affection for these endeavors, and had tried to pitch to you that when he had all of his time free in retirement, that would have really turned into something, you would have said that's too speculative?
Yes, I mean, we might have had a conversation about that, and if the information was sufficiently convincing, I might have said, well, okay, let's run a second set of numbers based on that and see what difference it makes, but it would just be an alternative.
Okay, and in this case, we haven't done that, right?
We have not done that, and I haven't done any such alternative analysis here.
Okay. So let's turn to the other component, the actual, either the increase in expense, the harm on the other side that flows from a person's death.
The services?
Yes, loss of services, I think is how you refer
Okay,
to that, right?
yes.
Do I have that term right? Okay. So what all goes into loss of services?
So this is, as I mentioned before, this is the loss of those things that a person contributes into a household, not in terms of income, but in terms of activity. Doing the laundry, helping with paying bills, helping with shopping, helping with home maintenance or yard maintenance or vehicle repairs, taking care of another person in the household, all those activities. And of course, how that stuff is split up varies from one household to another, from one individual to another.
That's not the sort of information that shows up on a tax return, correct?
That's correct. That does not show up on a tax return.
How do you quantify that?
So we have wonderful sources of U.S. government data. One of them is something called the American Time Use Survey that's done by, oh shoot, it's either Census or Department of Labor. I can't remember which one does this, but basically what they do is they get a sample of households around the country, a pretty good sized sample, and people keep what's called a time diary for a period of time. People, some weeks, the people in the sample record what they're doing all the time. Okay, I spent an hour going to the grocery store. I spent 30 minutes mowing the lawn. I spent an hour helping my kids with their homework. All the things that people do are recorded in these diaries, and then this information is compiled. And so there's a set of summary tables that forensic economists use drawn from these data set, and I can look and say, okay, for someone who looks like this, a married male, this age group, spouse is employed or not employed, kids in the home or not in the home, whatever it is, I can look and say, on average, this is how many hours a week this kind of person spends on these household services.
So it sounds like this part of the analysis is really based on the broad population and not specifically on the Brophy household.
That's correct. I was looking at someone, what I would call demographically similar. And so for the first part of the analysis, I'm looking at data for someone in the same age range as Mr. Brophy, who's employed and whose spouse is employed. Um, in the second part, after his retirement, I'm looking at someone who's retired, whose wife is retired, and how much time they would spend on household services.
So if I understand what you just said correctly, you broke this into two blocks. One is during this 5 or 6 year period, 6 years till he's 70, where he's still working pretty steadily and he's occupied with that quite a bit of the time. And
Yes,
then the post-retirement time where he's got quite a bit more time on his hands.
that's
correct?
right, because the data show that when people are retired, they spend more time on services around the house.
So how does that figure differ? If we look at that breakdown, the during work years and after work years, how do you decide how much more time somebody can spend around the house after they retire?
Well, again, I'm just looking at the data for average people, average males, I should say, who are in that same situation.
All right. So in this instance, what figures did you actually apply?
Not sure I understand the question.
To come up with the number of that part of the economic loss?
Mhm.
What was the actual calculation? And I don't mean in minute terms, but just
Like
generally
how many
describe
hours
to
per
us.
week or?
Well, how many hours per week and how you blend those two post-retirement and, I mean, pre-retirement and post-retirement phases?
Sure. So, so during the time when he was still working, um, about, let's see, 15, 16, um, about 16 and a half hours a week in household services. And this is for married men working full-time, spouse employed, ages 55 and over, living with a spouse only, because presence of children in the household would change things. For the period after his retirement, I'm looking at the table for married men retired, spouse not employed, living with spouse only, and here we have 21, about 23 hours per week.
Okay, so it goes up from 16 hours per week to 23.
Yeah,
And that
rough
again,
numbers.
there's no way, you didn't have information available, and I take it you wouldn't think it would be practical to figure out what Dan Brophy actually did. You're looking to people, men like him,
That's
in the community in Oregon or across the country?
This is for the whole U.S., not specific to Oregon.
All right, so I've asked you a question like this before, but I'm going to ask you again in this context. If you learned that Dan Brophy was a master chef and loved to cook and did that very, very regularly, related to that was the person who did most of the shopping, the grocery shopping for the family. He did all sorts of gardening, and then on top of that, he actually liked to do laundry. He was the main person doing laundry, and that sounded like it was more than 16 hours. That was for men in this culture, that was a very significant contribution and above average. What would you have said if we said, well, you've got to take him into consideration?
So this is a situation I have run into before in other cases, and sometimes I have made an adjustment, not so much in a situation like this, but sometimes we have a family that lives in a rural property on a lot of acreage. They've got a lot of cattle or livestock, for example, and I'm hearing about a guy who's out there every morning with the cows and that kind of thing. It's like, okay, we're looking at another couple hours a week or something like that. In this one, uh, again, it's another situation where, well, we could talk about an alternative, but I'm not sure I would want to have gone there.
Okay, so you're saying that you're taking the more conservative path.
Yes, yes.
And by conservative, you mean that you're keeping the number low because you feel you can justify that.
That's right. It's and I've run into a lot of situations where I've worked for attorneys in injury cases, and they say, "Oh, but this person was doing this and this and this. Surely the services were greater for them." Maybe, but maybe they were doing more of this, but less of this other thing. And unless I have some really solid evidence to support that, it's hard for me to deviate from the data which are based on national averages for people in the same situation.
My last question about this calculation has to do with life expectancy. That's a multiplier, right? You again are looking at the number of years that you would expect him to be providing these household services.
That's correct.
How do you figure that out?
Government data. The CDC, Centers for Disease Control, publishes life expectancy data. Tables are widely available online. And so I can look and say, okay, for a man of this age, at his death, Mr. Brophy was almost 64. He had a life expectancy of 19 years to about age 83. Now, I don't assume that a person is going to continue at the same rate of household services for their entire life expectancy, because typically when people are near the end of their life, their health declines a little bit and they're not able to do as much. And so I use what's called healthy life expectancy, which is about 2 years less for projecting the loss of household services.
So your analysis in this case presumes that he will become less productive and less able to provide help around the house when he's about 81.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And again, if you have information that the person is working in really a pretty high pressure, physically demanding job, like working as a chef in a hot kitchen on his feet all of the time, and hasn't had significant health problems, does that impact your assessment of maybe how many years of he might be able to offer services?
Um, so I'm not a medical expert, and so I'm not qualified to make any kind of assessment of how an individual's life expectancy might be different from the average. The government data for life expectancy are based on the full, basically, sample of people in the country. And so that includes people who are in excellent health, and it also includes people who are in poor health. It's an average. And so if someone is healthier than average, okay, that's probably an understatement for their life expectancy, but I'm not in a position where I can make that judgment and say, wow, this person was really fit. They would have had a longer life expectancy.
Okay, so again, you're going to take just the very middle of the road standard assessment based on the population and not increase that number of years based on information that you have about Mr. Brophy in particular.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So did you, as you were preparing this analysis, prepare for us a summary of your findings?
Yes, I did.
Right. Let me show you both Defendant's Exhibit 331 and Exhibit 269. Can you tell me, first of all, what 331 is?
331 is a copy of my CV, or curriculum vitae.
All right, and what's 269?
269 is a summary table of my projections of the loss of pecuniary support, financial support that I was describing previously, and the loss of household services, and then a sum at the bottom.
Okay. And I noticed, Mr. Britton, would you bring up 269, please? I noticed that here the term estimated is in there. Is that for the reasons that you've already described, that some of this has to be based on population demographics and data that's been collected by the government? You have to work from that to estimate what these numbers would be?
Yes, absolutely. The term I'd probably use is projected or projection, because it's an estimate of how things would be in the future. But We never know. Okay, I think I'm going to live a long life, but I could walk out the door today and get hit by a bus, and boom, no more earnings. Right? You never know.
Right. All right. Can you see that on the screen in front of you?
I do.
All right. So there's a total at the bottom, but I see the two component parts that you've been describing there. So with respect to the loss of income, the loss of pecuniary support, what number did you assign in this instance?
$402,041.
Right. And then for the second component, the increased expense, essentially, the loss of household services, what did that come to?
$730,992.
Right. And when you add those together, what do you estimate is the economic loss to Nancy Brophy from her husband's death?
$1,133,032. And I will point out, for those of you who are taking careful note, you might look at the ones and say, well, we're adding a 1 and a 2, shouldn't that be a 3? That's what happens when things are rounded to the nearest dollar.
All right. So again, you're rounding down.
Well, it's just, the spreadsheet does it.
Okay. All right. All right. I'd offer defendants 269 and 331.
No objection.
All right, those are admitted.
Thank you, Dr. Livingston. I have no further questions right now.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Dr. Rubinson. Just a couple of questions for you. Were you paid to be here today?
Yes.
And how much are you paid? I don't know if it's a standard rate or specific.
Yeah. I bill at $350 an hour.
And I want to ask you some specific questions about the numbers and the calculations you talked about. But before I do that, you've mentioned a couple of times your understanding of the plan for retirement, the retirement age, the plan for the Odonada. Where are you getting that information?
As far as his plans for retirement, that was transmitted to me by the defense attorneys.
Okay, so that's specific to Dan.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, so looking at the two sort of categories, I guess we'll talk about one and then the other. So talking first about loss of pecuniary support. The calculation of income that you talked about, looking at the tax returns, that was a specific number to Daniel Brophy.
That's correct.
Okay. But then the 20% that you assigned for their spending decrease, or the amount you're taking away, that is not a specific number.
It's a specific number for him based on the household income and his income and the size of the household, which in this case was 2 people.
And so would that be a standard calculation you're looking at with when you have a particular person, you're looking at age, size of the household, what their income range is, and then you're looking at this is the percentage I'm going to assign based on that?
That's correct. There's a formula that economists use for this.
Okay. And so similar to what I think Ms. Weinmiller was saying, if someone actually contributes a little bit more or someone contributes a little bit less, you're not looking at that specifically in this case.
That's correct.
And I think I answered, or you just answered this, but to be clear, in talking about listening to Ms. Couch's testimony, you also didn't look at the specific bank account information.
I didn't look at the bank accounts at all. I didn't look at any of that financial information. It's not relevant to my analysis in this case.
And that was going to be my next question. That wouldn't be part of what you do, correct?
That's correct.
And the pecuniary, so you are estimating, or this estimate is based on the presumption of Mr. Brophy working until about age 70, or roughly 6 years. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And that is based on that he's working at both jobs for those entire 6 years.
That's correct.
And so if, for example, Mr. Brophy was only planning to work for like 2 more years, let's say, or was only planning to work at one of those places of employment and was going to stop working at the other place, that would then change your numbers. Is that right?
Absolutely.
And oh, I think I already asked that question. I can't read my own notes. Okay. And then in looking at the loss of household services in that calculation that you do, you talked about the there are time estimates that you look at for how much time is spent doing various activities. How is the monetary amount assigned to that? And for example, if you're looking at how, you spend this many hours doing laundry, you spend this many hours helping your children with their homework, how do you determine what the value of that is? Because obviously no one's paying you, right, to do those things.
That's right. That's a great question. Typically, we use an average rate for replacing those services.
So like
Wage
laundry is probably easier. If I were to take my laundry somewhere,
more if someone were to be hired to do that for you.
okay.
Yeah.
So maybe a better example would be if I hired someone like a nanny or someone who came in that was going to help my children with their homework while I'm at work, or I guess if I'm not there, right, help my children with their homework, do some laundry, maybe cook a meal, that sort of replacement cost.
Yes, yes.
And so again, it sounds like what you're describing then, that particularly with the loss of household services, there is nothing specific to the person whose economic loss you're estimating. It's, well, maybe that's a bad way to say it. That it is because you're looking at age and circumstances, but not at like what they actually do in the household.
That's correct, yeah. Unless I have some really strong specific information for that person that would lead me to adjust the standard tables.
Which would be like your farm analysis. Or
Exactly.
Example.
Yeah.
And as you're putting together this analysis that you did, you mentioned Social Security income or Social Security payments. How does that factor in or not factor in?
Did not at all. Yeah, I mentioned that in the context of my understanding was that he had planned to work until age 70 so he could maximize his Social Security benefit. But the Social Security benefit amount does not show up in this analysis at all. In fact, I don't have sufficient information to have made an estimate of what his Social Security would have been at age 70 or any other age.
And how do you account for life insurance? And specifically, if someone is well insured, then their spouse would not have the same loss than if they weren't well insured.
Okay, so this is an interesting question, and you have to forgive me because I'm not a lawyer. In general, I'm doing this kind of analysis in a civil context, and whether a person has insurance, life insurance, or does not have life insurance doesn't affect the analysis in any way. The term for it is collateral source. And so if I'm looking at the case of someone who dies in an automobile accident or something like that, whether or not they have life insurance doesn't change the analysis of economic loss. So I in general don't look at that and don't know anything about what kind of insurance coverage they may or may not have.
Okay, and so then looking at the two calculations, when we're looking at loss of pecuniary support, that's a calculation that goes up until roughly the age of 70 because of the retirement plan.
Correct.
And so then the loss of household services, If I'm getting this correctly, you use the age of 81 because you did that 2-year back from estimated life
Correct.
expectancy.
Correct.
Okay. And so this 1.13, and now I'm rounding, but the $1.13 million total economic loss, that is an amount of money that will be over a 17-year period. If he's 64 and we're going to 81.
That's right. And it's the present value. So this gets back to that really confusing thing I mentioned before about discounting or reducing to present value. That's sort of the sum of money today that would compensate for those future things, the loss of financial support and the loss of services over the relevant time span.
Okay, and so that calculation is done for that's how much kind of would be accrued with all those additional things sort of calculated, time value of money, discounting the present value over that 17-year period.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would use exactly those words, but it's the amount of money today that would be sufficient to replace those streams over the relevant future time periods.
And that's where you were explaining, which would be different than just giving someone, I think you used $500 now, because then you could put it and invest it and it could grow in a different capacity.
That's right. And the idea of discounting or reducing to present value is to eliminate that potential windfall at the end of the time period.
Okay, I think just one last question or set for you. It, this scenario, for example, doesn't take into a situation like a divorce, would it? In other words, if you divorce your spouse, then your losses are going to be different. Your assets are going to be divided in some other capacity. Your calculation is simply if someone were to die.
Hmm. Okay, that's not exactly where I thought that question was going. Um, if I were to make an assumption that somebody who's married is getting a divorce down the road, that would be speculative on my part. I don't have any foundation for making that kind of an assumption. If I were working on an analysis and I knew people were getting a divorce, then that would certainly change the analysis in terms of the composition of the household, and I'd be on the phone to the attorney who hired me saying, okay, so what does this mean in terms of who's entitled to pecuniary support and all those lawyer questions to which I don't have answers. But there's none of that showing up here in my analysis.
Sure, and I guess a better question would have been if you knew that there was a divorce, that would change then the allocation because that person would no longer be getting the same sort of pecuniary support and all those things I think that you just mentioned, depending on the terms of the divorce.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know where to go with that. Sure, it would be different.
All right, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Redirect.
Just a couple. Dr. Rubinson, let me try to take these things in order. Now, you indicated when you were testifying that you did look at the W-2s and the tax returns,
That's correct, yes.
and those were important to your analysis.
Yes, because I wanted to see the earnings history over time and the total household income.
Okay, and you did consider the total household income to see whether that would impact either the reductions or the increases that you were explaining were part of the formula.
Yeah, the total household income really comes in that personal consumption number. So because that depends crucially on household on total household income. If you think about someone who has an income of millions and millions of dollars a year, their own personal consumption is a tiny fraction of that income. People can only spend so much on their own clothing and food and things like that. Whereas for a household that has a smaller income, that one person's share of fraction of income that goes to their own spending is likely to be much larger.
Okay. Now, you were also asked about how much, I think I'm paraphrasing here, but how dependent your assessment is, your analysis is on the facts that you were given about Mr. Brophy's intent to continue working until he reached full Social Security benefit age of 70.
Yeah, so that, oh, go ahead.
That if you had not been given that information, if you had just done this based on demographics, what people across the country, men across the country his age tend to do, I think you said that the retirement age would have been somewhere 69 or 70, almost exactly the same number.
Almost exactly the same, yes.
You're also asked a question about whether the availability of a death benefit through life insurance would impact your analysis. And is it fair to say that the cost of those services that you have to replace and the loss of income coming into the house, that those figures are the same? It doesn't matter if you've got another way to cover it. The assessment that you're doing isn't, is this person going to be in the hole and destitute? The assessment that you're doing is, what's the impact to her? Not how's she going to get past that, but just.
Sure. It's just the loss, and it's not how much of the loss might be covered. So, for example, I've got a car, I've got collision insurance on my car, and so if someone clobbers me at an intersection, my insurance company will help to repair it. If I didn't have collision insurance and someone clobbered me, I'd be on the hook, but the cost of repairing the car is the same whether it's insured or not. The loss is the same.
And the damage to the car is exactly the same.
It's exactly the same damage to the car whether it's insured or not. And that's probably a really unfortunate example to use in this case. I apologize for that.
So let me ask you about this number, the total estimated economic loss. If I understand you correctly, what you're saying is this number of 1.13 million is really much lower than the actual loss. But, and I shouldn't probably qualify that by saying lower, but it's lower than the actual loss, the actual cost to Ms. Brophy. But this, if you put this much money in the bank today, it would earn enough money to catch up with what the actual expected loss would be.
It would replace the lost financial support that I calculated based on his earnings, and it would replace those services that are lost. This is a little bit tricky. It's why economists are not popular, because to me, the loss of a person is much more than this. Okay, people have value, and this is not putting a dollar figure on the value of a person. It's putting a dollar figure just on these economic services and financial support.
Okay, and to recap something that you've said throughout your testimony, the fact that Dan Brophy was a wonderful and extraordinary person is something that you just are not tasked with and couldn't possibly include in this figure.
That's absolutely correct.
I have nothing further. Thank you.
All right, may the witness be excused?
For us, yes.
And for the state?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Dr. Rubinson. We're just at 3 o'clock, so we'll take our afternoon break and resume at 3:15.
All rise.
All right, please be seated. Is defense ready for its next witness?
We are, Your Honor. We call Fred Hartvedt.
Sorry, what was the last name?
It's Hardvedt, I
Okay.
believe.
Okay. All right, Mr. Hartvedt, we'll have you come and stand in the jury box here. And if you can get as close to the microphone as possible, we'll give you an oath. Just stay standing for a moment.
Okay. I'll have you go ahead and raise your right hand, please. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I so swear.
Okay, then you may be seated and you may remove your mask. And then because we're being recorded, I'll ask you to please state and spell both your first and last name.
Frederick Hartvedt, Frederick Hartvedt.
All right, and Mr. Hartvedt, there is water there if you want any. We'll remove that other cup when we have a moment. And whenever defense is ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to get you a fresh cup just in case. Mr. Hartvedt, how are you employed?
I work as a mechanic for BMW of Portland.
Okay, is that the one in Southwest Portland?
Yes, 2001 Southwest Jefferson is where the main office is.
Okay, so that's pretty close to where the Oregon Culinary Institute used to be.
Yes, the Culinaries was on the 17th, and that's only like 4 or 5 blocks away.
Okay. How long have you been working there? Not, I don't mean at that location, but for BMW, for this dealership.
Started in '88, so about 37 years.
Oh, okay. Where were you working in the summer, specifically in June of 2018? Where was your part of that dealership located?
We were on 17th in the old cop shop building,
Okay, and
just at the end of Madison, right behind the bleachers of the school.
and when you say the school, are you talking about Lincoln High School?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let's put up an aerial and see if that helps. I think 233 might be our best. Okay, now there's a pointer there right in front of you with that green handle. There's a big version right behind your head that the jury
Right.
can see, and I'm wondering, would you mind showing them where we're talking about on that aerial?
Let's see. Well, this would be our building here.
That big long one?
Yes.
Okay.
And then all these cars were what we were working. We had, and fencing was there.
Okay, when you say fencing, is there fencing that runs along, now which street is 17th?
That would be this one.
All right, and you mentioned Madison. Which one's Madison?
Right here.
Okay, and then the big street there, what's that?
That right here would be Jefferson.
Now, where were you in relation to the Culinary Institute?
Well, we're here, back over here working, and the Culinary Institute is right here.
Okay, all right, and the parking lot that's across from you there, what is that?
Right here.
Well,
Right here. That's public parking, one of those city park, pay to park.
and what's that building right behind that parking lot there?
I think that was the Culinary's main office building.
So more like an administrative building?
Yeah, or the school.
Okay, and then the parking lot that's in between those two, whose parking lot was that?
Here,
Yes.
that was the Culinary Institute's parking.
Okay, and then that one that's full of cars over on the,
That's our parking lot.
okay, and
That's
that,
all our used cars.
and that's to the east, correct? You're to the east of OCI?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's good enough for now. Well, let me ask you, since you're standing, so you don't have to get up again. Right to, I guess, what's to the north of your building, what is that there? That structure that we can see, it doesn't really look like a building.
Oh, right here?
Yeah.
Those are all the bleachers.
Okay, so those are
There's a gate here to get underneath it, and they had parking under there.
all right, and those are bleachers then that are facing the track, obviously.
Yes,
Okay.
that's the high school track.
Okay, great. I think that's all we need with that diagram for right now. Now, are you still working in that location?
No,
You're still working for BMW?
yes.
What, did you just move operations to a different site?
For about 3 years, yes.
Okay. So what is that, sometime 2019 maybe?
Somewhere around there, yeah. Our parent company that bought us out from Rasmussen BMW had acquired a building on Front Avenue, Terminal 1, and they moved 3 recon facilities from their locations down to there.
Okay, when you say recon, that sounds like industry
Reconditioning
slate.
of vehicles that get traded in.
Okay, is that what your particular job there is, actually reconditioning trade-ins?
Yes, reconditioning the trade-ins and PDI the new cars that come in.
All right, and so you would do that sort of off premises away from the dealership where the customers would come?
That's where we were located, yes. But anytime they wanted to show a specific car to a customer, that they could bring a customer down to see it.
Oh, you did entertain some customers there?
Very, very few. Mostly they'd come get the car and take it up to them.
Okay, all right. Well, I'd like you to look at a couple of photos of the building that you were in at the time, or that I believe you were in at the time. Mr. Breton, 224 through 227 are the ones that we're going to want to go through now. Do you recognize that building?
That looks like it's the top corner with the for lease sign on.
Okay, is that the building that you were pointing to before? Is the one?
Yes, the big square building.
And that's the one you were working in?
Yes.
Okay. And is that a section of the bleachers there?
Yes, in the background, yes.
Okay. You see how on that photo somebody circled a camera?
Yes.
Was that there during the time that you worked in that building?
Probably yes, because we had another one above one of our main doors, entrance doors.
Okay, I'm going to have you look at a couple more photos, but you mentioned earlier what you understand that building used to be used for. Could you tell us again?
It was the police property building
Okay.
at one time when we've had a few people come down there to pick up their property after being released, and we're like, it's no longer here.
Okay, and when you say released, you mean let out of custody?
Yes.
Okay, like it served a prison sentence and then came up to check on.
And found their stuff wasn't there.
Okay. Mr. Breton, would you go to the next one? I think that would be 225. Do you recognize that as part of the same building?
Yes.
Okay. And what about 226? Does that look like that's also part of the same building you were working in?
Yes.
Right. And last in this series, can you look at 227, please? You know, that might be the one you looked at earlier. That looks very similar.
So that one outside by the stairwell doors.
Oh, is that the other camera you referred to just a moment ago?
Well, we have the 3 big doors to the side there, and then the 2 small doors in the picture were emergency exits for getting out of the building.
Okay. And was this the side that you would enter through when you came to work?
Well, normally I'd park and go through the gate and go in through the man door.
All right. Okay. Let me ask you about that gate and about working there. You mentioned that there were people who had just been released from custody who came up thinking maybe some of their property was still there. Were there security precautions in place when you were working at that facility and storing cars in that lot to make sure that BMW's property maintained its integrity and that people weren't breaking in?
Basically, we just kept the doors shut and the gate closed. You know, there's no special things done that I know of.
Okay. Had you had occasion to have some concerns about break-ins?
Every now and then someone would go over the fence or get through the fence on the 16th side and break a couple windows trying to find things, but
Okay, and you moved out of that neighborhood sometime, it sounds like in 2019 maybe?
19, yeah, about 3-4 years.
Okay. In the last, let's say the last year or so before you moved out of that neighborhood, how frequently would you see people who were homeless, unhoused, who were living in the immediate vicinity of that building?
We had a camp across the street by the big tree that was in that first picture. They'd camp under that because it'd keep them dry. And they'd come and go. Sometimes, one group would show up, another would leave, and then they'd leave.
Okay. Did it seem like that had increased in the years before you left that location?
Not really. It just seemed more consistent, like they were staying longer.
Oh, okay. Okay. There are a couple of other photos I'd like you to look at to see whether you can identify or explain to us what those are too. Mr. Breton, would you start with 234, and there are 3 of them, to 236. What are we looking at here?
That, I believe, is the back of the Culinary Institute.
All right. And is that the perspective essentially that you would have if you walked out the doors of the BMW recon facility that we were just talking about?
If we went out our south door and was into our parking lot, yes.
Okay, so the gate that you were talking about that goes across that parking lot, that was securing that parking lot.
Yes.
If you were standing right in front of that gate, is that about what you would see?
Yes.
Let's look at 235. Is that a close-up of the same thing we were just looking at?
Yes.
All right, and what about 236?
That's kind of a slightly different angle. Coming off of, just, from the, almost like from the detail shop that was next to us.
Okay, and then, so there's another auto business there that's not affiliated with you.
Right, it called Uptown Detail, or at least it was.
Okay, so now we're looking, I think.
Virtually straight into the parking lot.
Right, and off to the right-hand side, that would be the back of those bleachers we were talking about.
Correct.
To the north, and is that white building that's kind of in the center of the photo, is that administrative building of the culinary school?
The one just like, it looks like it, yes.
Half hidden by that tree?
Yes, half hidden by the tree, yeah.
Okay. All right, I have no further questions, and I want to thank you for your patience. I'm sure the state will have a couple of questions for you too.
All right, cross-examination?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Do you know when the last time that building was, the building you were working in, was actually used as a Portland Police Bureau property room?
No, sir, I do not.
You've been working there for quite a while though, right?
Since about before 2015.
Okay. Was it a property room was it ever a property room while you were there?
No, they had moved all their stuff out, and then we had to move our stuff in, like racks and compressors and things.
Were you part of that move?
Getting the facility set up to work in, no, but I moved into it. Was one of the ones that moved into the building.
Sure. You weren't part of the people that moved into the building.
Not the ones that put the racks up. That's another company we use.
Gotcha. And you personally ran into people who were there looking for property?
Fortunately, no. My other coworkers did.
Okay, so you didn't personally have that experience?
No, I just heard from them.
Okay. And so you didn't personally ever experience anybody coming there that was upset about any sort of property or anything like that?
No.
And in 2018, I guess you never experienced that, so never mind. What time were you working on June 2nd, 2018?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall that day because of the large amount of police activity that
Yes.
occurred that?
Yeah, we went down in to do some work to catch up on some PDIs.
Okay. And what time do you think you arrived at work that morning?
I'm thinking about 8:30-ish.
You think you arrived at 8 or 8:30?
Yeah, because it was a Saturday.
Okay. Do you recall being interviewed by Detective Scott Broughton? Let's see, what's the date of this? On July 3rd of 2018. I know it's almost 4 years ago, so maybe you don't remember the exact date, but do you recall being interviewed by Detective Broughton?
No, I do not.
Do you recall being interviewed by a police detective?
Some of them may have called me and asked me a few questions, but like I said, I do not recall.
Okay. I'm going to show you police report. And I don't want you to read it out loud. Just read this first sentence here, just to yourself.
Okay, so that would.
So I'm going to ask you a question. After reading that, does that help refresh your recollection as to what time you actually arrived at work that morning?
Yes,
Okay. And what time do you think you arrived at work that morning?
around 6.
Okay. Would that be unusual for you to arrive at 6 on a Saturday?
Normally, yes, because we normally don't work on Saturdays.
Okay. So is there a reason why you would have arrived early that morning?
Just because when we're working in our satellite buildings, we have a safety protocol, and we don't like having people showing up and being there by themselves.
Okay.
So my friend, my compadre Francisco probably said he was going in at 6, so I joined him.
Okay. And that makes sense to you? That would be normal to do?
Yes,
Okay.
he's an early riser.
And do you recall that morning you actually being there with Mr. Jaramillo?
Yes,
Okay. Francisco is
yes.
okay. And what were you doing? So you arrived at about 6 a.m. What were you doing that morning?
Like I said, PDIing brand new cars.
I'm sorry, I don't know if we know what PDIing is, but
Pre-purchase inspection.
okay. Were you moving cars around that morning?
Yes.
Okay. Were you moving them in and out of the lot or just around the lot?
In and out. We take one road tests.
Okay. And when you do that, would you sometimes drive up Madison or would you always head out 17th to Jefferson? How would you go? Or would it vary?
Depending on traffic, it'd vary.
Okay. And is it safe to say that that morning you were kind of in and out doing that type of thing?
Yes.
Okay. And did you notice anything suspicious that morning as you were going in and out from the hours of 6 o'clock all the way up to the time all the police arrived?
I did notice that the kids or students of the Culinary Institute seemed a bit agitated. And I noticed that a couple of them were down at the corner of their building at 17th and Jefferson. At that time, a fire truck pulled up.
Okay, so before all the police arrived, you took note of
And so when I deemed with the fire truck going to be on Jefferson, I went up Madison to not be get in their way.
So something you noticed as you were heading out one of these times.
You're right.
Okay. And so besides that, besides all the students and obviously the fire truck and the police activity, before that, had you noticed anything suspicious in the area?
No.
And I don't know if you took note of the Culinary Institute that morning, again, between the hours of 0600 and the time you saw the students in the fire truck. Did you recall anything unusual about the Culinary Institute? Did you notice any doors open or anything like that?
I may have mentioned that it looked like the roll-up door where they do the receiving might have been partially opened.
Okay. And you thought you maybe remembered that?
Yeah. Well, it's they open it and close it several times when they throw ice out, when they're done with it and stuff like that in the street.
Okay, but that morning you think you remember at least being partially open?
It could have been. I can't swear to it.
Okay, fair enough. And you said every once in a while somebody might try to get into the lot, and break a window or something, maybe rifle through the cars, it sounded like. Is that
Yeah,
what you're trying to get at?
we've had, cars with broken windows before.
Sure. Have you ever had any encounters with any people in that neighborhood where it turned violent?
No.
Okay. I don't believe I have any further questions. Thank you.
All right, redirect.
I don't think I have anything further.
Okay, may
Thank
this
you.
witness be excused?
Yes.
All right, and sir, if you could, I don't see it, maybe you already got rid of it, but if you had a water cup, if you could get rid of it.
Oh, I
that'd be-
didn't grab one.
Okay, all right, well, thank you then.
Defense will call Francisco Jaramillo next.
Okay. All right, Mr. Jaramillo, we'll have you come and step up into the witness box here. And if you could stay standing once you get in it for just a moment while my clerk gives you an oath. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I'll have you raise your right hand, please. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay, then you may be seated and you may remove your mask. And then because we're being recorded, I'll ask you to state and spell your name, just when
You
you're
can
saying.
have a seat, though.
Thank you.
Sure.
Francisco Jaramillo,
And could you please spell the full name? Thank you.
Jaramillo.
And how do you spell the first name?
Oh,
It's
Francisco.
okay.
Framisco.
All right, and Mr. Jaramillo, there is water there if you want it.
Thank you.
Sure. And then whenever defense is ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Jaramillo, do you work with Fred Hartvet
Yes, I am.
at the BMW?
Yes, at BMW.
Right. How long have you been working for BMW?
Around 28 years.
Okay. How long do you think you were in that building that was at 17th and Madison in Southwest Portland?
Oh, gosh. I would say 5 years.
Okay. Where is that part of the operation located now?
Right now, we are at the Squire Motors, which is in between 17 and 18 and Jefferson.
Oh, so about maybe a block and a half away?
Yes.
Close.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. When did you move out of that building that's on 17th and Madison?
Oh, about 3 years ago.
You remember, was it 2019? Are you pretty confident?
Oh, I don't recall, but I know it's about 3 years ago prior to the coronavirus.
All right. And did you move directly over to that location that's, I think you said it used to be Esquire Motors, the one that's at 18th?
We just moved on that one at the beginning of the year.
Okay.
But prior to that, we moved at the T1, they call it.
You mean like the shipyards T1?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you moved all the way down to the river for a while and then you moved back into the neighborhood?
Yes, we did. Yeah.
Okay. All right. During the time that you were working in now, the building that you were working in at 17th and Madison, what do you understand that used to be? Who was the prior tenant?
I believe it was a warehouse for the police department.
Okay, the Portland Police?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. Yes.
Did you have occasion sometimes while you were working there to deal with people who showed up at the building thinking it was still the Portland Evidence Room?
For occasion, a couple of times, yes. They
Okay.
knock at the door and insist that I want to pick up my items. And we try to explain to them that there's no items in this building anymore.
Okay. Were those people who maybe the police had seized some property from them and they were trying to get it back?
Correct. Yeah. At one point, they have property and they went in jail and they got out and they expect to see their item, but they give them the address, but there's no longer.
Oh, okay. So they've been in jail so long that
I believe
things
so.
had changed?
Yes.
Okay. There were Was there security in that building, or did there appear to be some security that was left over from the time the police bureau had the building?
Yes, it was, and it's still there, but not active.
Okay, during the time that you worked there, were any of those cameras in use?
No, none.
Okay, did you have your own camera system running?
No, we didn't. We have a large system, but that's it, no cameras.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what kind of security did you have in place?
I believe it's when you open the door with that, you open the door, of course, you have to set your code, your alarm, but if you don't have access to the code, the alarm will sound.
Okay, and that's for the building proper, right?
Yes. I'm
oh,
sorry. What?
I should have warned you. I'm so sorry.
I turn it off. I'm sorry.
Phones have a mind of their own sometimes.
It's off.
See?
Sorry.
Okay, so the building itself, the big white building, is that what you're talking about?
Yes,
Okay, and there was a big parking lot adjacent to it, correct?
correct. Yes.
Okay, was that lot also secured?
Yes, it has a fence and automatic doors.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. During the time that you worked there, did you personally have experience with people breaking into that lot?
Oh gosh. Yes, I was, but not direct to me. Another coworker.
Okay.
Somebody tried to take the car away from her, but nothing happened because the guy couldn't start the car.
Okay. And then did you take measures, just as a standard part of your practice, did you take measures to make sure that people didn't get into that parking lot where the cars were?
Well, yes, the door shuts automatic, and in some cases, if you're by yourself, you should wait until the door shuts. Don't assume that it's gonna close. And then at the end of the day, you're the last one to leave, the door open, the gate open, and then we have a habit of wait until the door closes and then you can leave.
Okay, so it's a door that'll automatically run itself all the way closed, but you still would stand and watch it just
Yes.
to make sure?
To make sure that it's closed, correct, yeah.
Okay.
Not everybody follow the practice, let me tell you. We're a few employees that are in a hurry, oh no, that close automatic. Okay.
Okay. So I want you to think specifically about like the last year that you were working at that location before you moved over to T1. In that year, how would you describe the population in the neighborhood of people who were unhoused, who didn't have a real home to live in?
Wow, we see from time to time,
Uh-huh.
camping in front of the building, and you never know who and what time or what day, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And during the time that you were working in that building, I think you said it was about 5 years, was that?
Yes, close,
Okay.
yeah. Uh-huh.
Did that seem like that was kind of a constant over that 5-year period, or how did that last year compare to the 4 years before it?
Oh, it comes and goes. I mean, I don't know, how can I say, maybe 2 days out of the week they were there, sometimes 3 days, sometimes you don't see them for a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, it was hard to say there's a daily guys there. No, not at that, yes.
Okay. Were there people, you or some of your coworkers, did you have some sort of system in place for making sure that everything stayed clean and the trash got picked up, or how did that get
Oh,
handled?
the city works. We don't pick up on occasion, yes. When it was too far or close to our gate or door, yeah, we get a garbage can and put the garbage in it and just don't let it go too out of hand, and that's it. But not that often,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Was there anything else that you did to kind of manage that situation just to make sure that everybody could be compatible together?
Not really. We just took it upon ourselves again. Fred and I were, I think, with the oldest and the youngest kid. They expect us to do it or something like that. But yeah.
That's the way it is.
Sorry.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in. I think they'll have some questions for you too, but that's all
Okay.
I have.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Jaramillo, you briefly mentioned something about an incident where somebody tried to steal a car or something. Is that right?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Okay. What happened? Did that person end up stealing that car?
No, they didn't.
What happened to them? Where did they go?
They took off running.
They just left?
They just left, yeah.
Okay.
Or he just left. It was one person.
Okay, he didn't try to fight anybody
No,
or
no,
beat
no, no,
anybody up
no.
or
No confrontation, nothing.
no weapons?
No, not that I know, no.
Okay. And then what about the people in the area? You talked about some of the homeless population that you had seen around here and there.
Yeah.
Did you have any violent interaction with any of those people?
No, because they were across the street pretty much, and we just, I don't know, we never have any conflict physically with them, no, not.
Okay, great. I don't
Yeah.
have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, may the witness be excused.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Jaramillo, you can step down. Thank you.
And Your Honor, I don't believe Mr. Hart that was ever excused.
Oh,
Just as a
okay.
matter
I
of,
thought he was, yeah.
Well, actually, I'm not sure I asked the state if they, so with regards to Mr. Hartvedt.
I didn't hear it, so I don't believe I would have responded, but
Okay.
of course, we don't have any objection. I just wanted to make sure we're all.
All right, no, I appreciate that. I don't think I asked, which I should have.
Okay.
So Mr. Hartvedt is also excused, and Mr. Jaramillo, you're excused.
Thank you.
All right. All right, and for the next witness, Ms. Weinmouth, if we can make sure the phone is off.
I will,
Um,
sorry. The defense will call Melanie Hamrickson.
Okay. All right, Ms. Hamrickson, we'll have you come up to the witness box here. And if you could just step in close to the microphone, but stay standing for a moment while my clerk gives you an oath.
I'll have you please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay, then you may be seated and you may remove your mask. And then, because we're being recorded, I'll ask you to please state and spell your first and last name.
Melanie Hamrickson, MElaniehamiericksen.
All right, and Ms. Hamrickson, I think you brought your own water, but if
Yeah.
you run out, we do have some.
Thank you.
So, all right, whenever defense is ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Hamrickson. Are you a little nervous?
Yeah,
I can see that.
thanks.
It's going to be fine, though. Everybody's pretty nice here. How are you employed now?
I work for Lincoln High School.
And what do you do there?
I'm the culinary arts teacher.
And Lincoln High School, is that the one that's right by OCI?
Yes,
Okay. But you used to work at OCI.
I did.
So tell me a little bit about what you used to do and how you've migrated to working at the school.
At the school I'm at now?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I worked at OCI for 10 years. I was a chef instructor there. I worked with Dan Brophy side by side for 6 years. I was his assistant in the kitchen. So the way that it worked, he would work in the classroom, and then they'd all come in the kitchen, and then I would assist in the kitchen.
Okay.
Yeah, I did that for years on the culinary side, and then I moved to baking and pastry, so we were separated.
Had you gone to culinary school before you were the instructor?
Yeah.
And was it OCI or another school?
It was Le Cordon Bleu.
So you've been around long enough to know that there's just been kind of an iteration of culinary schools? And did it start out as Cordon Bleu, or was that one of the schools in the middle?
For me, it was Le Cordon Bleu.
Yeah.
It was Western culinary, I believe, before that, and something else before
All
that.
right. And was Dan Brophy one of your instructors?
Yeah.
I want to separate between when you were a student and then later on when you were a peer. How did you get along with Dan when you were a student?
I thought I was really funny, and he liked to be the funny one in the room. So, I mean, we got along fine. We weren't best friends like we were in the end, but we were fine.
You said something to the police about the fact that maybe hadn't gotten along with him great in the beginning, but that was a friendship that evolved over time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I was young, really
Yeah.
young. I hadn't been in, I'm from Medford, Oregon. Like, I hadn't been to college. And so, and that was my dream. And I think I was nervous around him.
Uh-huh.
He made me nervous at first, but yeah, it definitely did evolve into a great friendship.
And once it evolved into a great friendship, was it one that you knew would just kind of go the distance, that two of you would be good friends for a long time?
Yeah.
Okay. And was that the case over the years, right up until the time he died?
Yeah.
You have an email that gives you a nickname, and what is that?
Well, my last name is Hammer,
Uh-huh.
but it's the Hammer is what.
Well, when we get emails from you, maybe you just did it for us. It says
Oh, it says
Meanie.
Meanie. It's just
Yeah.
missing the L.
Okay.
I don't know why that happened.
Did someone
I
take
know.
the L out of
No,
your name?
nobody nicknamed me Meanie.
Oh,
It's like
okay.
quite the
It's like-
opposite of
Oh, I thought
who
if
I
you,
am.
if you worked at a school.
No,
you
I
had a
think
name
somebody
like
was just
Meanie.
doing it fast for me and forgot the L. I have
Okay.
a very long name.
Did Dan Brophy have a nickname for you?
The Hammer.
And did anybody else call you the Hammer, or was that just Dan?
Dan just called me the Hammer. Wilkie did sometimes. Most of them was, it's like Hammer Time, Hammer, Ham Jam. Lots of nicknames.
Okay.
I was the only female there for a while, so
And
little sister they picked on.
what is it fair to say that Dan Brophy treated you respectfully and as a peer?
Yeah.
And that the two of you really enjoyed just kind of having conversations.
Yeah.
And even after you left the school, did you and Dan continue to kind of touch base, maybe talk about gardening or other kinds of things?
Yes.
And when you reached out to him via text, was he quick to respond to you?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't, I knew he didn't like to text, but we had my partner and I had a ground hornet problem, and he texted back immediately and helped us through that and told us what to do.
Okay.
So,
How close to the time that he died was the last time that you got to see Dan Brophy?
I was trying to think about that the other day. I think it was a month or two before.
Uh-huh.
I was doing some work for other coworkers at OCI, some just side work, and Dan came in to the kitchen just to say hi.
Just to say hi? Yeah. And maybe razz you a little bit?
Yeah.
When you guys, there was a time though when you guys were working side by side for what, 5 years?
5 or 6, yeah.
In addition to your work at the school, did you also, I read something about maybe some private catering?
Yeah, we did some private catering.
And was that just you and Dan who did that?
No.
Who else?
His wife, Nancy.
Oh, okay, so that was part of the catering company.
Mm-hmm.
And in the time that, when you and Dan got to spend a lot of time together, did he talk to you at all about his marriage?
Yeah, I mean, little things, nothing in depth. He was a pretty private person.
Okay, I don't want to embarrass you, but I'm just going to ask you whether
Oh, I know where you're going.
I'm going to embarrass you, aren't I?
Yeah.
And we can talk about it in the most general way.
Okay.
But were there times that he talked to you about the intimate or sexual aspect of his life that, how do I say that? That's not going to embarrass both of us. I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I know where you're going with it.
Did that happen?
Yeah, we would have events, and that's just kind of the way chefs are, and they just tease each other, and they would tease me, and then they would tease him, and it wasn't like a one-on-one Dan and I talking about what was going on at home.
Okay.
Ever. It was like at work parties and things like that we would tease each other about those things.
Okay.
But that was it.
All right. In all the time that you talked with Dan Brophy, was there ever a time that he complained to you about his marriage?
No, I don't remember.
Okay. You guys are pretty good friends, though.
Yeah.
It's going to sound a little bit gendered, but my sense, and tell me if it's wrong, was that Dan treated you just like a good friend and not like a woman friend, just like his good friend.
Yeah.
And he, even though he was a pretty quiet guy, he was comfortable talking with you about a number of different things?
I guess.
I mean, by Dan standards.
Yeah, yeah, I guess. I mean, we talked about chickens a lot.
Can you just, I mean, I know that you have great affection for this guy, but can you just describe for the jury just kind of who this man was?
Oh man, you want me to cry, don't you?
Not really.
He was my mentor. I owe everything, like my whole career, to this man. I read something last night about somebody saying that when he died, a piece of them died, and that's how I feel. And it's hard. And I think about, he started the program at Lincoln High School. He started the culinary program. They came to him to start it up, and he generously gave his time. And so when he passed, the week before he passed, they asked me to take that position. And I was like, no way, high school kids, ugh, no thanks. But then I had to take it. I had to keep that legacy going for him. So he was supposed to walk me down the aisle at my wedding. We were just really close.
Be a good man.
He's a good man. He was, yeah, he's a great man.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions. They might.
Cross-examination.
Yeah, thank you, Your Honor. I just want to make sure we understand the timeline too. You talked about the time you spent at Culinary Institute or in school at Le Cordon Bleu. Were you a student of Dan's in 2002? Does that sound about right?
I think it was 2003.
Okay, right around there.
Yeah, right around there.
That's when you think you were attending
Yeah.
Le Cordon Bleu?
Mm-hmm.
And then when did you actually start working for Dan as his assistant?
2006.
Yeah. And that went on for 5 or 6 years or something?
Yeah, I mean, we still work together. We just were in different departments after that, after the initial 6 years.
Okay, I see. So you still worked there, just somewhere else? Yeah. Okay. When did you leave the Culinary Institute?
2016.
Okay. And that's when you went to where?
It's called Portland's Culinary Workshop.
Okay. And you were there until you took the job at Lincoln High School in 2018?
18.
18, okay. Thank you. I just want to make sure we got the timeline done. You obviously spent a lot of time at the Culinary Institute. Did you ever see Nancy Brophy there? Did she ever come in?
From time to time.
Okay. And would she just go to one spot in the school, or did she kind of?
I think the spot was usually wherever he was, or she would be eating.
Okay. So either the restaurant or wherever he was teaching? Or...
Either in his classroom, in his kitchen, or the restaurant.
Okay.
Yes.
And in the school, I don't know if we've heard this yet, but is there, like, to go from room to room or hallway to hallway or anything like that, are there, when people are there, are there like locked doors you have to go through? Do you have to have a special key card or anything like that? Or is it pretty open?
Yeah, outside doors were generally locked. Someone would have to let you in, but you could move freely around the building.
Once you were inside?
Once you were inside.
And you said that Dan was supposed to walk you down the aisle at your wedding?
Yeah.
When was your wedding supposed to take place?
Well, we haven't gotten married yet.
Okay.
But that kind of put a wrench in it. But no, we just talked about it. We talked about it throughout the years we worked together. That my dad passed when I was 19, and so Dan always said that he would do it.
Okay, so that was just kind of always the plan then?
Yeah.
Okay, so is it safe to say that Dan was actually more than just a peer or a friend? He was more like a father to you?
Yeah, I would say that.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, redirect.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, may the witness be excused.
Yes.
And for the state?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Hamrickson, you can step down. All right, and who is the defense next witness?
Sarah Taylor.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, and we'll just have you come up to the witness box here. And if you could step into it, but stay standing for just a moment.
Okay, I'll have you step a little closer to the microphone, and then if you could raise your right hand, please. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay, then you may be seated and you may remove your mask.
Thank you.
And because we're being recorded, I'll ask you to please state and spell your first and last name.
My first name is Sarah, Sarah. Last name is Taylor, Taylor.
All right, and there is a pitcher of water if you want it.
Thank you.
All right, but whenever defense is ready.
Good afternoon, Ms. Taylor.
Hi.
Are you sergeant with the Portland Police Bureau?
I am.
Okay. And on June 2nd, 2018, were you also in that position?
Yes, I was.
Were you then assigned to Central Precinct?
Yes.
Where are you working now?
North Precinct.
What geographic part of Portland does Central cover?
Downtown, part of the east side also.
Okay.
Generally downtown.
Is most of Southwest and Northwest in Central, or is it more downtown Central?
Most of Northwest and Southwest is also in Central Precinct.
Did you respond to the culinary school on June 2nd?
I did.
You know, and it doesn't really matter exactly when you got there, but do you have a general sense of when you arrived with respect to everybody else who responded from the police bureau?
I would say that in relationship to the radio call, it was pretty shortly after we were dispatched.
Okay, and that when you got there, were there already EMTs and people from the fire bureau there?
Were there already, I'm sorry.
Were the fire people and the medical responders already there when you arrived?
I don't remember.
About how many people do you think were there?
In my group, on the front of the building, the Jefferson Street side of the building, there was a handful of officers with me, maybe 4.
Okay. When you say on your side of the building, it sounds like you divided up sides.
We didn't do that intentionally. What I kind of realized later is that there was a back entrance. I think maybe that's the Madison side, and then a front entrance that I think maybe went into the restaurant portion of the school on Jefferson.
All right. You were a part of the radio traffic with dispatch that morning. Do you recall that?
I would say most likely I was, yes.
At one point, do you remember reporting that you heard some footsteps upstairs?
I was provided that piece of dispatch, and that was my voice. And I recall saying that, and then I also recall why I said that.
Well, let's go through this
Sure.
first. Now, the Culinary Institute is a one-story building, is that correct?
That's correct.
What is your best recollection? And I know this was a couple of years ago. We don't have video of exactly where you were at the time, but what's your best recollection of where you were standing when you were making that report, or at least when you heard these footsteps upstairs that you were reporting?
Sure. I was in, the middle of the front portion of what I would call the restaurant area, this kind of the storefront area closer to Jefferson.
Okay, and when you say the middle of it, are you saying you're inside the building in that restaurant area?
Most likely.
Okay, all right. All right, so you were going to explain more of what you recall about why you thought that was significant enough to report to dispatch.
Sure. So when I entered the building, we were still kind of in a mode of, we weren't sure when this event had taken place. So we were sort of clearing the building to make sure that it was safe. And when I went in with my group of people, I could hear footsteps. What I wasn't aware of is that other officers had come in from the back entrance also. So at that point, before I encountered that group of officers, I heard footsteps. So without that information that they were coming in from the back, my brain was just trying to figure out where the footsteps were coming from. As soon as I saw them, I realized it was their footsteps.
When you were listening to that earlier, was it your sense that you were reporting something that you were hearing at the moment that you were reporting it, or that you were reporting that you had heard footsteps?
So I believe I reported that I was hearing footsteps, and I think I made a statement, um, and then I think I said something like, "Can you advise?" So it's putting information out there, and then asking for some feedback. Um, but I do remember that shortly after I was inside of that building, I saw other police officers, so that question was answered for me where the footsteps were coming from. It was coming from them.
Okay, and did you report that to dispatch, the fact that you had resolved this mystery?
No, and I wouldn't typically do that.
Tell us what it means to clear the building. I think I know what you mean, but
Just to make sure that it's safe, that there is nobody hiding or any other potential victims.
all right. So were you a part of the process of actually clearing the building?
I was sort of overseeing that process.
All right. So can you describe what was done to accomplish that?
I'm trying to think back. I know that typically what we would do, I had a group of roughly 3 or 4 for the purpose of just checking areas, checking areas of each room, and looking for victims, and potentially looking for people that are in the building that shouldn't be there.
When you say you were supervising, were you also going with them and looking and checking out all the areas that might need some special attention?
Maybe not as specifically as them, but I was definitely in the area. It wasn't a very big area, if I recall.
Were there places in that building that you could get up into the ceiling or up to the roof?
Oh, not that I'm aware of.
Did you specifically check or assign someone to figure out whether there were in fact places that one could get up into the interior part of the ceiling or up all the way onto the exterior part of the roof?
I don't have a specific recollection of that, but what I do know just about my own process is that if that could have been done or needed to be done, then we would have done that.
Well, if you don't find a suspect and you've got somebody who's been shot, it always needs to be done, doesn't it?
So what I mean by that is, if there is not a way for someone else to access those areas, then generally, like if we can't access those areas, it's generally pretty safe to assume that they're not accessible by anyone. It would be sort of like saying, did you check the 7-story building next door? Well, I mean, it could go on and on. It didn't make sense.
So let's apply that to this specific situation, though. I think maybe I misunderstood what you were saying, but it sounded like you are not personally certain, that there were not ways to get up either into the interior part of the ceiling or up onto the roof.
Well, I think what I was trying to say is I don't have a specific recollection of assigning that job. But again, what I do know about our processes is that if I had thought that there was a way to access another area or get up into another area, that I would have assigned that task.
Okay. So if there were some sort of utility closet that in fact did have an opening that went right up into into the rafters or the eaves on the interior part of the ceiling, that would have been something that you thought should be explored?
I would think so.
Do you have a recollection now of whether a determination was made that there was in fact such an opening?
I don't have a recollection of that.
And if there were a storeroom that had a ladder that took one up onto the roof, would that have been something that you thought should have been explored?
Possibly.
Do you have a recollection of whether there is in fact such a ladder that goes up to the roof?
I don't have a recollection of that right now, no.
All right. But you do know from reviewing the tape, the dispatch recording, that you used the word upstairs when you said footsteps?
I did. I do know that I said that.
Okay. And in your mind, that was resolved because you thought it was your colleagues coming in to help?
Yes.
All right. Oh, I don't think I have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for inconveniencing you.
All right, cross-examination.
Sergeant Taylor, had you been in the Oregon Culinary Institute building before that day?
I don't think so.
Okay. And so when you entered, safe to say you weren't familiar with the actual layout.
I was not.
Okay, so you didn't know whether upstairs, I suppose, could mean different things. When you say upstairs meaning another level, or upstairs meaning a few steps up to a separate area.
Could have been, yeah, it could have been a landing area or an upstairs.
Okay, so when you're saying upstairs, are you identifying how many stairs or to what area you think that's coming from, or is it just a distant sound?
It's a way to say I'm hearing footsteps from another area.
Okay, and you testified to this on direct that the sound that you were hearing was then resolved as you saw these other officers. You're hearing the same footsteps that you're reporting you had heard upstairs.
Yes.
Okay. So in your mind, was there any reason for you to think any further that there was a threat from above?
No.
And how long have you been a police officer?
22 years.
22 years, okay. And so as an officer of 22 years and a sergeant who leads people into potentially dangerous situations, had you thought that there was somebody in this drop-down ceiling area? Well, first of all, does that make any sense to you? Would you have expected to encounter somebody in a sort of drop-down ceiling, faux ceiling?
No, I don't think that the drop-down faux ceiling that I am imagining wouldn't hold a person's weight generally, or there would be some kind of disturbance.
Okay. Yeah, meaning you think you at least might hear something?
Yes.
Okay. And so had you thought that there was another threat in this drop-down ceiling, would you have investigated that further?
Of course.
Okay. And the idea that there might be an opening of some sort, you're saying you didn't personally see an opening?
That's correct.
Okay. Even if you had seen an opening, would you still expect to see somebody up in that sort of drop-down ceiling? I mean, would you expect that to hold somebody?
No, I wouldn't. Not in a drop-down ceiling.
And if the only access to the roof was a very narrow, vertical metal ladder that was behind a locked door that required a key, would you have had access to that day?
Not immediately, no.
Would you even know what was on the other side of that door?
No.
Okay, I don't think I have any other questions. Thank you.
Redirect.
Just a couple. So, Sergeant, I assume you've attained that position because you are respected by your peers and by the administrators in the department,
I would hope so.
and you are known as a clear communicator.
Yes.
The point of communicating with dispatch is to make sure that people can coordinate and understand what others are saying.
That is one part of the communication with dispatch, yes.
So if you thought you were hearing people in another room, would it make sense to use a term like upstairs rather than just saying, I hear footsteps in another room?
Could you ask that question one more time?
Right, when you're talking to dispatch and really, this is an emergent situation. You just found somebody who's been shot, right? There's an unknown suspect and you're trying to identify if the person's in the room or in the building or can still be apprehended. Would it not make sense if what you really were saying is, I think I hear somebody in another room, not to just say, I think I hear somebody in another room, as opposed to using the term upstairs. I think I hear footsteps upstairs.
So, and I'm sorry if I wasn't clearer about it. I didn't have an understanding of the layout of the building at that point. I didn't know that we actually had access to that back portion of the building the way that the officers ended up coming to me. So I'm hearing these footsteps. So my brain is saying, okay, I can see this area. We have access to this area here. So if I'm hearing footsteps, they're coming from another place. And I know that there are still some places that we haven't cleared. So when I say upstairs, I'm thinking because it's not here in this area immediately before us. So maybe over there is a landing or a set of stairs or, you know, an area that you commonly see in sort of restaurant settings downtown. So it was a proposal, if you will, to explore other areas that haven't been checked.
Okay. And was that the only time you've ever been in this building?
I believe so.
Okay.
I've been around the building, but not inside the building.
You may not recall this, and it's perfectly fair if you don't. But with the exception of the entrance off of Madison, isn't that all on a single level? You just walk in right off the sidewalk, there's a door, and you just come in at the same level, and you walk throughout the entire building without going through any stairs, with the exception of the entrance off of Madison.
From what I understand, it's the entrance at the front that I entered in with my group, and then, yes, the entrance off of the back.
Okay, so there are with the exception of that entrance off of Madison, there are no interior stairs.
Not that I believe, no.
There may be this ladder that we've talked about that goes up to the roof, but there's nothing else that would constitute a set of stairs.
No, not that I'm aware of.
And did you go back to the Madison Street entrance to see how many stairs there are coming down there?
I did not.
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ardently excused.
Thank you.
Well, let me ask, I have to ask them to make sure they,
Yes, that's fine.
all right, and
Yes,
for the
yes.
state?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, now you can be excused. That's all right. Who is the defense next witness?
Is it Detective Clifton?
No, I think, I think it's
Okay.
Brad.
Huh?
Brad.
Detective Brad Clifton?
Okay.
That's the I can't see with the glare. Should be in order.
All right, Detective Clifton, we'll just have you come up to the witness box here, and my clerk will give you an oath once you go inside and are as close as you can get to the mic.
Please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Then you may be seated, and you may remove your mask. And then because we're being recorded, I'll ask you to please state and spell your first and last name.
Yes, Brad Clifton, Bradclifton.
All right, and Detective Clifton, we do have water there if you want any.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. Defense, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Detective Clifton. How are you employed?
I'm a detective with the Portland Police Bureau,
And how long have you been there?
23 years,
And how long have you been a homicide detective?
approximately 6 years.
On June 2nd of 2018, did you respond to a call at the Oregon Culinary Institute?
Yes, I did.
And at the time, were you a homicide detective?
Yes,
And how many people were at the school at the time of your arrival? Do you remember?
I don't recall.
Were there a number of students who were present?
Yes,
And by then, were there a number of other OCI employees who were present?
I know there was some staff that was there, yes.
Okay. And how many detectives were there?
I don't specifically recall. I would say at least 10, maybe 8, something along those lines.
And did someone divide up or kind of assign detectives to interview some of the witnesses who were present?
Yes, Sergeant Wadham.
And how many witnesses did you personally interview?
2.
When you interview a witness, do you try to keep a record, either an oral record or a written record of what the witnesses said?
Yes, specifically in the homicide detail, we will at minimum audio record our interviews if possible.
And you'll also make a written report of those interviews?
Yes.
And is that because sometimes you want to maintain a record of what people said, knowing that maybe a case isn't going to get to trial, or you're into a courtroom for several years?
Yes.
Or maybe the case isn't even going to get solved and you need to be able to go back and know what people told you at the time, even though they might not have the same memory later?
Yes.
On June 2nd, did you interview an OCI student by the name of Miranda Bernhardt?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall asking Ms. Bernhardt whether she was aware of any homeless people within the area?
Yes.
And what did Ms. Bernhardt tell you?
She said yes, that there were homeless people that frequented the area.
Did she tell you whether she observed one person in particular that morning?
Yes, she did.
And what'd she say?
Miss Bernard said that morning she observed a male black in his 40s at the house next to the school going through a recycle bin.
And did she say that this black male in his 40s had a gray beard?
Yes, she did.
And did she tell you that this person was near the school just prior to the time that she entered the school? Do you remember?
Said it was that morning.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Any cross-examination?
Detective Clifton, good afternoon. To clarify, when you're saying the school, Ms. Bernhardt was referring to the admin building across the street from the actual school, isn't that right? So you had an exchange with her about which building she's talking about. When you're interviewing her, were you in the sort of smaller group of buildings that was towards the Lincoln High School side of Madison?
Yes.
Okay, and she was referring to it being a house next to where you were interviewing her?
I don't recall.
If you look at, do you have a copy of
My report?
of the transcript?
I don't.
Huh. I'll show you what is page 10 of the transcript, bait stamp page 2. Just read that yourself.
Okay.
Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
And so was she referring to specifically the area next to the admin building?
Yes, she was.
Okay. And the man she was describing, did she describe him as just canning?
Yes.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right, may this witness be excused.
Yes.
And for the state?
Yes.
All right, Detective Clifton, you can step down. All right, the defense next witness.
Your Honor, we anticipated that the court would end at 4:30, so.
That's fine, we can end. I do want to take up something with the attorneys after the jury is out, but we will end for today. Yes. Actually, you can turn off. I'll wait for you to come back.
That's okay. I just wanted to move the camera so that the jury.
All right, everyone can be seated. I just wanted to bring something up so that we avoid any problems. I don't think it was a problem today, but it could have been. There was a defense witness, Ellen Levine, who checked into the WebEx. Obviously, witnesses are excluded. Ms. Lou did notice it and had her removed about 5 seconds after she checked in, but it's my understanding that she's talked with the defense team about how to have people appear for the hearing. So I would just say, to the extent you can talk to your witnesses and make sure they understand the proper procedure and aren't checked in prior to when they're going to testify. Other than that, is there anything anyone wants to put on the record?
Your Honor, I think I just want to offer Defense Exhibit 260 and Defendant's Exhibit 260.1. It's the email cover letter and the combined report that was described and identified by witness Freimark.
Any objection?
No.
All right, those are admitted. And just for planning purposes, generally speaking, obviously there will be days where I understand with witnesses it may not be feasible, but we'll generally plan to go to 4:45. 4:45? Yesterday, the reason we left early was yesterday we thought there might be some disturbances in and around the courtroom. I don't think there were at that time of day, but we were erring on the side of caution.
We will try to have small witnesses that we can tuck into the last
Okay,
part.
all right. Then we'll adjourn till tomorrow.